Ever imagined stepping into a medieval tavern? You're probably picturing a cozy hearth, a bard strumming a lute, and friends sharing a hearty laugh over flagons of ale. It's a romantic image, straight out of a fantasy novel or a role-playing game. But what if I told you the reality was far grittier, far more dangerous, and smelled a whole lot worse? Let's pull back the curtain on the real medieval tavern, a place that was the chaotic, beating heart of medieval society. Forget the charming inn from your favorite movie. The moment you push open that heavy wooden door, you're hit by a wall of smells. The floor isn't clean wood. It's covered in straw, mixed with spilled ale, old food, mud, and whatever else has been tracked in or dropped. This isn't changed daily, so imagine the aroma. The air is thick with smoke from a poorly ventilated fireplace, and the tallow candles that provide the only dim, flickering light. You can barely see the person across the room through the haze. This isn't cozy. It's claustrophobic and filthy. This was the true atmosphere of a medieval social hub. Now, not all watering holes were the same. You had three main types. First, there were inns. These were primarily for travelers. If you were on a long journey, an inn offered a place to stable your horse and rent a bed for the night. And I say a bed, but you were likely sharing it with several strangers. Privacy wasn't really a concept. Then you had taverns. Originally, these were just places to buy wine, like a medieval liquor store. Over time, they evolved to serve food and drinks on site, becoming the all-in-one establishments we often think of. Finally, and most common, were the ale houses. These were often just the front room of someone's house, usually run by a woman, an alewife. They brewed their own ale and sold it to their neighbors. Ale houses were the local down-to-earth pubs of the common folk. So what were people drinking? The mainstays were ale, wine, mead, and cider. And it wasn't just for fun. In a world where water sources were often contaminated and could make you seriously ill, alcoholic beverages were the safer bet. The fermentation process killed off a lot of the dangerous bacteria. This meant everyone, including children, drank some form of weak low-alcohol small ale as a daily staple. The quality, however, was all over the map. There were regulations, like the assize of bread and ale, meant to control prices and measures. But brewers could be fined for watering down their product or using questionable ingredients. A strong, well-brewed ale was a point of pride, while a bad batch could ruin a reputation. Feeling hungry? Well, the menu was ... limited. The staple dish in most taverns was pottage. Think of it as a perpetual stew. A big cauldron was always simmering over the fire, and ingredients were constantly being added to it. Grains, vegetables, and if you were lucky, some scraps of meat or bone for flavor. You'd get a bowl of this stew with a chunk of coarse, dark bread. Sounds simple, but hygiene was not a priority. The same pot, the same ladle, day after day. Food was often served on a communal wooden plank or in a shared bowl, and you ate with your hands or a personal knife. Despite the dubious preparation, this meal was a vital source of calories for many people who couldn't afford to cook a hot meal at home. Who would you be sharing your pottage with? The clientele of a medieval tavern was a true cross-section of society, and that's what made it so volatile. You'd find merchants cutting deals in a corner, and dusty pilgrims telling tales of their travels. Off-duty soldiers, still armed and looking for a release, would be drinking alongside local artisans, unwinding after a long day's work. Even clergy members weren't immune to the tavern's draw, though they were often criticized for it. And women were a constant presence, not just as aloyvis and servers, but sometimes as patrons themselves, and often as prostitutes, conducting their business in the tavern's shadowy corners. Mix in a few thieves, con artists, and beggars, and you have a recipe for a very interesting and very dangerous evening. With this combustible mix of people, what did they do for fun? They gambled. Gambling was everywhere. Dice games like Hazard were incredibly popular, as were early forms of card games. The stakes could be anything from a few coins to a man's entire property. For some, it was a desperate shot at social climbing. For most, it was a quick path to ruin. Cheating was rampant. Loaded dice were common, and arguments over a game could escalate to violence in a heartbeat. More brutal forms of entertainment included things like cockfighting or even bear baiting, turning the tavern yard into a bloody arena for sport and betting. These weren't just pastimes, they were high-stakes social rituals where fortunes and reputations were won and lost. And that brings us to the most defining feature of tavern life: violence. It wasn't just a possibility, it was an expected part of the experience. The combination of alcohol, weapons, gambling, and a culture built on personal honor was explosive. A perceived insult, an unpaid debt, a dispute over a game, any of these could trigger a brawl. Knives were common, but patrons might also use daggers, swords, or simply grab a heavy stool or drinking mug. The consequences were severe. A tavern fight could leave you maimed, dead, or facing the law. Your social standing could be ruined, and you could be hauled before a court for disturbing the peace or worse. Taverns were truly places where your life could change or end in an instant. Linked closely with this world of drink and danger was prostitution. For many taverns, it was an integral part of the business model, Tavern keepers would often employ women not just to serve drinks, but to provide companionship and sex. These women lived a perilous existence. They faced the constant threat of violence, disease, and social ostracism. While some were independent, many were controlled by the tavern keeper or other men, trapped in a cycle of exploitation. For the men who visited them, it was a transaction that fulfilled a need, but for the women, it was a dangerous and often tragic way to survive in a harsh world. The supposedly cozy tavern was, for many, a place of immense suffering. So who kept all this chaos in check? The legal system was a confusing mix of official and unofficial authority. On one hand, you had constables and the town watch, who might be called in if a brawl got out of hand. The church also tried to regulate behavior, condemning the sins of drunkenness and gambling that thrived in taverns. But often, the primary authority figure was the tavern keeper himself. He had to be tough enough to break up fights, throw out troublemakers, and enforce his own rules. However, these keepers were often corrupt, watering down drinks, encouraging gambling, and turning a blind eye to crime if it brought in more business. Justice was often arbitrary and crude, based more on who you were than what you did. Imagine waking up the morning after a night at the tavern. Your head is pounding, your pouch is empty, and you might have a fresh cut on your face. This was the stark reality. The morning light revealed the true cost: the physical injuries, the crippling debts from gambling, the ruined reputation from a drunken argument. For many, it wasn't a one-time event, but a relentless cycle. They'd work all week, only to lose their earnings and their dignity in the tavern over the weekend. Starting all over again on Monday, the tavern offered a temporary escape, but its price was often steep and paid over a lifetime. So, were medieval taverns just dens of misery and violence? Not entirely. Despite all the danger and squalor, they served a vital purpose. In a rigid hierarchical society, the tavern was one of the few places where different classes could actually mix. It was the original social network. News, gossip, and business ideas were exchanged over ale. It was a place to find work, to hear travelers' tales from distant lands, to forge friendships, and to build a sense of community, however rough. It was a space for human connection in its rawest form. The medieval tavern was a paradox, a place of both community and conflict, of opportunity and ruin. It wasn't the sanitized fantasy we imagine, but its messy, dangerous reality tells us so much more about the lives of the people who called it their local. Thanks for watching. If you found this glimpse into the past fascinating, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more dives into the real history behind our favorite myths. See you next time.